The space was torn apart as a massive spatial vortex took shape, as if leading to another world. At that moment, before the eerie, pitch-black vortex that made one's heart race, a towering figure emerged. Initially, the figure was gigantic, but as it appeared, it shrank to a normal size. All eyes from the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy turned toward it in shock. It was an elderly man in black robes. His hair and beard were both white, and his face looked somewhat aged, yet there was an oppressive and awe-inspiring authority radiating from him. This authority even caused the very space around him to tremble slightly. The entire world seemed to bow beneath his feet. An indescribable pressure descended, silencing the previously jubilant Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy in an instant. Not just the students, but even the elders, their faces pale, stared at the figure in awe. The pressure was something they had never felt before. Even the most powerful figure in their academy, Lord North Abyss, had never exuded such suffocating force. Who was this newcomer, whose power had reached such an unimaginable level? In the distant sky, the spatial vortex squirmed, and after the appearance of the godlike elder in black robes, more lights appeared within the vortex. Then, a low, beastly roar echoed. Following this, the crowd saw approximately 100 giant cranes, their bodies entirely silver and crackling with violent thunder, flapping their thunderous wings as they flew through the vortex and hovered quietly behind the black-robed elder. It was then that everyone realized the cranes were each carrying a knight in silver armor, wielding enormous silver spears. Though they said nothing, a chilling aura of ruthless intent swept over the scene, as if the sound of war drums was in the air. The pressure was so intense that many students turned pale. These knights riding the thunder cranes had clearly been through countless battles between life and death. This was a real army, not a group of scattered, untrained soldiers. If these thunder crane knights decided to attack, even supreme experts would likely struggle to resist. At that moment, Mu Chen also stood up, his face solemn as he looked at the black-robed elder and the thunder crane knights behind him. The thunder cranes, likely the thunder-swallowing cranes ranked 24th on the spirit beast ranking, had appeared in such numbers, clearly showcasing the terrifying power of the Luo God Clan. When this mysterious force arrived, the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy was momentarily stunned. However, the academy quickly regained its composure. The sound of breaking air filled the sky as elders rapidly took to the air, their expressions cautious as they watched the newcomers. Following the elders, a large contingent from the punishment hall also took up a defensive position. But despite the academy's precautions, the group did not advance. The black-robed elder merely glanced at them indifferently, before his gaze fixed on a certain direction. There, a young girl, growing even more beautiful by the day, stood tall, her delicate face calm as she stared back at him. Upon seeing her, the elder's stern face showed a barely perceptible smile, a hint of kindness. His eyes then shifted to Mu Chen, who stood beside Luo Li. Though they were quite a distance apart, in that instant, Mu Chen felt an overwhelming pressure penetrate through the space, enveloping him. It was so intense that even the massive rock beneath his feet cracked with a faint fissure. However, the range of that pressure was controlled perfectly. Aside from where Mu Chen stood, the pressure did not spill over. Luo Li seemed to sense something and furrowed her brow slightly, about to step forward. Mu Chen extended his hand to grasp her smooth wrist, gently shaking his head. He knew that if Luo Li were to step forward and stand before him at this first meeting, the ruler of the Luo God Clan would likely be utterly disappointed in him, though perhaps he never had any expectations to begin with. Mu Chen's expression remained calm, though only Luo Li, whose wrist was in his grasp, could feel his hand trembling slightly. Sweat seeped down his back, dampening his clothes. The pressure from a heavenly supreme was simply too terrifying. If Luo Heavenly God harbored killing intent, he could probably erase Mu Chen with a single thought. Despite the immense pressure on his body, Mu Chen's outward demeanor remained composed. Thus, when the pressure suddenly receded like a tidal wave, Mu Chen found that he was unable to move even his body. His palm, clenched with force, had left a circle of finger marks on Luo Li's fair wrist. In the distant sky, Luo Tianxin slowly withdrew his gaze and spoke lightly. "You do have some endurance. you're not as weak as I imagined." Behind Luo Tianshun, two thunder-devouring cranes were closest to him. Each crane carried a man in silver armor, both appearing to be in their late 20s. They exuded an aura of strength, their demeanor impressive and extraordinary. The two men clearly held high status, though they kept some distance from each other and did not speak much, as if their relationship was not particularly close. However, both their expressions carried a hidden air of ruthless determination, like silent Azuras. The Thunder Crane Knights behind them, seeing the backs of the two men, were filled with genuine awe. Clearly, these two individuals were not simple figures. When they heard Luo Tianshun's casual voice, the previously indifferent eyes of the two men shifted slightly. Their gazes, faintly directed toward the source of the voice, carried an unusual expression. Whoosh! Inside the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, a streak of light shot into the sky. The headmaster of Tide Song appeared, his face serious as he looked at Luo Tianshun. Before he could speak, a familiar laugh rang out across the heavens. "Hell, what a rare guest. I never expected the Luo God Clan to come to our Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. I failed to greet you properly. My apologies," said the headmaster of Tide Song. Beside him, an elderly figure with a slightly hunched back appeared. It was none other than the North Abyss Dragon Kuan. When the many students saw the appearance of the North Abyss Dragon Kuan, they secretly sighed in relief. It was clear that he was the true pillar of stability in the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. As North Abyss Dragon Kuan appeared, Luo Tianshun's gaze turned toward him. A trace of surprise flashed in his eyes, likely due to sensing the latter's strength. They were both Earth Supremes. "Ah, so you must be the Honorable North Abyss. I am Luo Tianshun. I hope you don't mind this sudden visit," Luo Tianshun said with a faint smile. "So it's clan leader Luo of the Luo God Clan. I've heard much about you." North Abyss Dragon Kuan smiled, cupping his hands in respect. His usual carefree demeanor was now replaced with a more serious tone. Though he had recently advanced to Earth Supreme, he understood there was still a significant gap between him and Luo Tianshun, who had already attained this level long ago. When Luo Tianshun's name resounded across the land, he was still an unknown. "Clan leader Luo, may I ask what brings you to our Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy?" Headmaster Tide Song asked with a polite smile after exchanging a look with North Abyss Dragon Kuan. "I've come to take my granddaughter home. I trust neither of you would object." Luo Tianshun smiled. Headmaster Tide Song and North Abyss Dragon Kuan exchanged a glance, and then turned their gaze toward the direction of the Luo God Society. In the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, the only person who could be tied to the Luo God Clan was that girl. However, they hadn't expected Luo Li to be the granddaughter of Luo Tianshun. That meant she was the future empress of the Luo God Clan. At the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, our students are free to leave as long as they don't break the academy rules. We won't interfere in their decisions, North Abyss Dragon Kuan said. "Thank you both." Luo Tianshun nodded and then stepped forward. In an instant, he disappeared from sight, and the two men behind him also vanished with him. Above the Luo God Society headquarters, the space rippled, and three figures materialized. They appeared before Luo Li and Mu Chen under the watchful gazes of countless eyes. "Lear, come home with me," Luo Tianshun said, his voice stern but with a touch of warmth, gazing at the increasingly remarkable girl before him. His once solemn and aging face now showed a hint of satisfaction. He smiled at Luo Li and extended his dry hand. Luo Li gazed at the elderly man before her, biting her red lip. She glanced at Mu Chen, and with some difficulty, she nodded lightly. Her steps were slow and heavy, her eyes filled with a heartbreaking sadness, like shattered glass. Mu Chen watched her leave. Although he had prepared himself for this moment, he couldn't help but feel a pang in his chest. His hand clenched involuntarily within his sleeve. If he were strong enough now, perhaps no one could take her away from him. Mu Chen took a deep breath. At this moment, he understood more than ever that he needed greater strength, because he never wanted to experience the scene before him again. Luo Li's steps suddenly faltered. She abruptly turned and crashed into Mu Chen's arms, her delicate jade-like arms tightly wrapping around his waist. Her teeth clenched down on her red lips, and a trace of blood appeared. Mu Chen also held the girl in his arms tightly. This scene made many members of the Luo God Society feel a pang of sorrow. Luo God silently watched the scene before him, while the two men behind him exchanged glances. They took a second look at Mu Chen before subtly shifting their gaze away. Mu Chen slowly released Luo Li, lowering his head and whispering in her ear, "Next time, I won't let anyone take you away from me. No one." His voice was calm yet firm, with an undeniable conviction that moved the heart. Luo Li's eyes shimmered with tears, knowing that for this purpose, the boy in front of her would have to make countless sacrifices that would make her heart ache. But in this moment, she said nothing. She only nodded solemnly. She stepped back, decisively turning away. As she passed by Luo God, she deliberately avoided his withered hand, clearly still harboring some resentment. Young clan leader. The two men behind Luo God smiled slightly at Luo Li. They bent forward, their hands clenched, and placed their palms over their hearts, saying, "Your knights are waiting for your return." With a wave of their hands, three thunder-swallowing cranes, their bodies glowing with brilliance, soared from the distance. One of them appeared particularly elegant and slender. Luo Li moved swiftly, landing on it. As Luo Li mounted the thunder-swallowing crane and was about to leave, Luo God finally turned his gaze to Mu Chen. His aged face betrayed no emotion. Mu Chen also raised his head. He gazed at the elder who had upheld the last glory of the Luo God Clan, his own youthful face calm and composed. Fearless, unwavering. A gentle breeze brushed across the sky, the clouds lazily floating, casting large shadows on the ground. Mu Chen and Luo God stood in the shadow, the wind lightly swaying their clothing. At that moment, everything around them seemed to quiet down, with countless eyes watching the two. Even those who were unclear about the situation seemed to feel an unusual tension in the air. In the distance, Tai Tsong, the headmaster of the Grand Song Academy, observed the scene, furrowing his brows. He glanced at Bei Ming Long Kuan, who was also staring in the same direction. The latter squinted slightly and waved his hand, saying, "Don't worry. Mu Chen is from our Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Although the Luo God Clan is not to be trifled with, I won't let him be bullied by outsiders here. However, the situation at hand is a bit tricky. After all, Luo God is Luo Li's grandfather. It's only natural for a senior to assess the person his granddaughter likes." Tai Tsong chuckled bitterly. "I'm just worried this old man might be a matchmaker for us. If that happens, it might not necessarily be a bad thing for Mu Chen," Bei Ming Long Kuan replied. He knew Mu Chen was a rough gem, and for it to become a true treasure, it still required some polishing. Tai Tsong sighed lightly, about to speak when his expression suddenly shifted. His gaze turned to a secluded green peak in the distance, where spiritual light flickered. A streak of flowing light shot directly towards Mu Chen. On the two thunder-swallowing cranes behind Luo Li, one of the men who had greeted her earlier narrowed his eyes, his figure flashing as he instantly appeared in the path of the oncoming light. "Please stop," he smiled faintly, his black hair dancing in the wind as he called out loudly. Swish. However, the streak of light showed no sign of slowing down. Its speed only increased, heading straight for them. The long-haired man narrowed his eyes, and the murderous intent hidden between his brows erupted. He clenched his hand, and a silver lightning spear appeared in an instant. Without hesitation, he thrust it forward. Boom. Thunder rumbled through the sky as the space around them shattered. Everyone saw a massive spear shadow piercing through the space, shooting like lightning towards the light. The light figure paused briefly, then extended a jade-like hand. At her slender fingertips, star-like light shimmered. She flicked her finger, and a huge spiritual array instantly unfolded. Within it, a massive volcano appeared out of thin air. The volcano erupted, and the violent and unparalleled spiritual energy swept across the heavens and earth, clashing directly with the massive shadow of a spear. A thunderous sound echoed as two terrifying forces collided, wreaking havoc in all directions. A flicker of surprise flashed across the eyes of the long-haired man. Just as he was about to strike again, his expression suddenly froze. The world around him dimmed, and the space distorted, forming an enigmatic spiritual array. Within the array, terrifying spiritual energy fluctuations rippled, trapping him inside. A graceful figure passed by from the front, crossing through the long-haired man's blockade and appearing in the sky above the Luo God Society headquarters. However, she merely hovered in the air, not approaching where Mu Chen and Luo Heavenly God were. But it was obvious to everyone that she had come because of Mu Chen. The terrifying spear light swept across and finally tore apart the mysterious spiritual array. The long-haired man broke free from its restraints. He looked with astonishment at the beautiful woman dressed in a white gown, her fair face slightly cold, and smiled. "So you're a spiritual array master. I misjudged you." The one who had intervened was naturally Ling Shi. However, she didn't look at the long-haired man, instead focusing on Mu Chen and Luo Heavenly God. Ling Shi's appearance caused Mu Chen to pause for a moment. He gazed into her clear, cold eyes, feeling a surge of emotion rise within him. He knew that Ling Shi had appeared at this moment simply because she didn't want him to bear too much pressure from Luo Heavenly God. Although her strength was vastly inferior to Luo Heavenly God's, she showed no hesitation whatsoever. As Mu Chen was touched by her actions, a clear and resonant long cry suddenly rang out from within his body. Then, everyone saw a dark purple light shoot up into the sky from Mu Chen's body, spreading out and transforming into an enormous black bird. Purple flames swirled around its body, rising in the air. It was the Nine Nether Soul Sparrow. It hovered high above, flapping its cloud-like wings, bringing with it a terrifying whirlwind. But similarly, it merely floated in the air and didn't take any further action. Nine Nether Soul Sparrow? The two men who had followed Luo Heavenly God, both of whom didn't appear ordinary, were once again startled. They glanced at Ling Shi, then at the Nine Nether Soul Sparrow in the sky, and finally looked at Mu Chen. A hint of surprise appeared in their eyes for the first time. This seemingly weak boy, in their eyes, truly seemed to have something extraordinary about him. After all, an ordinary boy would never have such a powerful entourage. Spiritual Array Master. Nine Nether Soul Sparrow. Luo Heavenly God also looked up at the scene, then gave a faint smile. His gaze turned toward Mu Chen as he said, "If this is your attempt to show off to me, your methods seem a little immature. If I wanted to show off, I'd come personally in the future. They're just my friends," Mu Chen replied calmly. Luo Heavenly God stared at the calm Mu Chen for a moment before nodding slightly. This first encounter wasn't too disappointing. If the boy couldn't even pass this first test, even if that girl would hate him for life, Luo Heavenly God wouldn't give him any opportunity. "What's your name?" Mu Chen said softly. "I imagine that with your relationship with Luo Li, she must have told you about the Luo God Clan." Luo Heavenly God said slowly. "So you should understand how important she is to the Luo God Clan." Luo Heavenly God looked at Mu Chen for a moment and said, "In the nearly 3 years since Luo Li left, the Luo God Clan has been through over 100 wars, and we've lost millions of people." Mu Chen remained silent. It felt as though he could smell the overwhelming stench of blood, a sea of blood. The war must have been extremely brutal. Luo Heavenly God turned his head, looking into the distance. Luo Li was sitting on a thunder-swallowing crane, gazing this way. The old man sighed helplessly and said, "I stayed to talk to you, not to force you to give up on Luo Li. Did you see those two people?" Luo Heavenly God glanced at the two men who had previously greeted Luo Li. One of them is called Luo Qingya, a rare genius among the younger generation of the Luo God Clan. He has no arrogance typical of geniuses. Over the years, he started from the bottom of the army, undergoing countless life-or-death trials. Eventually, at this young age, he became the commander of the Thunder Crane Legion. Now, he holds great prestige among the 4 main legions of the Luo God Clan. The other one is called Luo Xiao. He is from a branch of the royal family of the Luo God Clan, though his status is not high. When he was young, he was called a waste. His father threw him into the battlefield during a war when he was only 10 years old. That battle claimed his father's life, but he crawled out of a mountain of corpses. Now, he has become one of the outstanding figures among the younger generation of the Luo God Clan. Mu Chen remained silent. These two men were undoubtedly not ordinary individuals, and they would surely become prominent figures in the future. He could sense that they were even more dangerous than Ji Xian. They are knights of Luo Li, and they also have feelings for her. Luo Heavenly God fixed his gaze on Mu Chen and said. Mu Chen furrowed his brows slightly, looking directly at Luo Heavenly God. Is clan leader Luo trying to make me back down? It's not about backing down, but making you realize just how extraordinary those who love Luo Li are. If you're not capable, standing beside her may not be a good thing for either of you. Luo Heavenly God said slowly. She is too exceptional. In the future, if you stand by her, there will always be people who don't like you. And when that happens, if you're looked down upon or humiliated because of your own strength, will you have her blocking all the nuisances for you? Mu Chen was silent for a moment, and just when Luo Heavenly God thought he had touched a nerve, he lifted his head, giving a faint smile, one that held no hint of arrogance. He looked at Luo Heavenly God seriously and said, Clan leader Luo, though you may think I'm arrogant and naive, I still want to say. Mu Chen glanced at the two men in the distance, whose excellence made all the talented individuals from the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy pale in comparison. A sharp light flickered in his black eyes as he said, By the time I reach their age, I will have far surpassed them. Luo Heavenly God was taken aback. He stared at the boy's bright, almost blinding eyes. The boy's sharpness and confidence surprised him. This youth certainly had courage. It seems you don't agree with my theory. Since that's the case, I won't say more. Time will prove everything. One day, we'll see whether Luo Li chooses an ordinary stone or a brilliant diamond. Luo Heavenly God said, no longer continuing the conversation. He understood the boy's youthful sharpness. Over the years, he had seen countless geniuses, but most of them had fallen short in the end. When the boy in front of him was eventually tempered by reality, only then would he understand the gap between him and Luo Li. At that point, perhaps Luo Li would still hold on, but he would quietly give up. Luo Heavenly God's voice hesitated for a moment, and then he said, Perhaps Luo Li has never mentioned this to you. She would likely oppose me telling you, but I still need to tell you. The Western Battle Emperor from the Great Western Heaven Realm. I'm sure you've heard of him, and you should understand what that represents. He is a true giant in the Great Thousand Worlds. He once wanted Luo Li to enter the Great Western Heaven Realm, which would have allowed the Luo God Clan to be under the protection of the Western Battle Emperor. At that point, all the dangers facing the Luo God Clan would have been resolved. But Luo Li refused. Mu Chen's pupils contracted slightly. The Western Battle Emperor. That was a terrifying figure who was considered to be on par with the Flame Emperor from the Boundless Fire Domain and the martial ancestor of the martial realm in the Great Thousand Worlds. Such a level was too far beyond him at this moment. The youth's face grew serious. He then took a deep breath, his black eyes locking onto Luo Heavenly God, his voice low and hoarse. Clan leader Luo, today you took Luo Li from me, but one day, I will take her back from your hands. At that time, no one will be able to stop me. The boy's eyes glowed with a blood-red intensity, almost as if he were mad. At that moment, no matter who Luo Qingya, Luo Xiao, or even the Western Battle Emperor was, he would fear nothing. The wind and clouds moved, but the thick atmosphere remained unshaken. Luo Heavenly God frowned as he looked at the boy before him. The boy's eyes, which seemed to burn with a savage intensity, held a devotion and madness that made him uneasy. It was a little startling. The youth certainly possessed great confidence. Moreover, this confidence didn't seem blind but came from deep within, from his very bones and blood. At that moment, Luo Heavenly God finally understood why his brilliant granddaughter, who was loved by so many, would fall for the boy in front of him. Compared to other young people, this boy did seem a bit different. However, despite this, Luo Heavenly God still just smiled at Mu Chen's words, shaking his head. His somewhat stern and aged face broke into a faint smile as he said, I didn't think too poorly of you when I first met you. But in the future, it won't be about words alone. Luo Li is my granddaughter, and as long as I still have breath in me, I won't let her suffer any harm. If you want to take her from me again, next time, let your actions speak for themselves. Also, Luo Li won't wait for you forever. So if you ever feel you can't catch up with her, then just give up. It will be better for both you and her. Mu Chen smiled lightly and said softly, Then please take good care of her, clan leader Luo. I believe that one day, you will change your opinion of me. Let's hope so. Luo Heavenly God gave a faint smile. Finally, he stopped speaking, waved his hand at Mu Chen, and then turned to leave, stepping into the air. This young man had a stubbornness and persistence beyond his imagination. It seemed that he couldn't persuade him, but it didn't matter. Time would prove everything, and with time, he would come to understand the distance between himself and Luo Li. By then, he would likely no longer be able to maintain his current stubbornness. Mu Chen watched the back of Luo Heavenly God as he departed, his hand unconsciously clenching into a fist. He took a deep breath, gazing into the sky. From their short exchange, he had felt immense pressure from Luo Heavenly God. The latter hadn't used sharp words to mock him, yet there was still an unmistakable sense of distance emanating from him. Clearly, Luo Heavenly God didn't think Mu Chen could truly reach a level worthy of his regard. However, Mu Chen wasn't resentful about it. After all, with Luo Heavenly God's perspective, he must have seen countless geniuses. No matter how firm Mu Chen's words were, they could not shake Luo Heavenly God's beliefs. In the distance, Luo Li's eyes were filled with a trace of anger as she looked at Luo Heavenly God, her voice turning much colder. "What did you say to him?" "Oh, are you afraid I'll threaten him?" Luo Heavenly God chuckled. "If a mere threat could make him give up, I'd truly start to doubt my granddaughter's judgment. I promised you that after we return, I will begin to gradually accept the Luo God Clan's legacy and take over the clan. No matter how difficult it may be, I will persevere." Luo Li lowered her beautiful eyes and spoke softly. "But I don't want you interfering with his decisions. He's the first person I've ever liked, and he'll be the last. Even if he doesn't achieve the so-called great accomplishments you expect, at least." She raised her delicate face and stared at Luo Heavenly God. The sudden brilliance in her eyes, like colored glass, radiated with a regal aura, as if she were a queen. "There's still me." Behind her, Luo Qingya and Luo Xiao exchanged a glance, their eyes flickering with complex emotions. They both gazed at the distant figure of the young man, their expressions inscrutable. Luo Heavenly God looked at Luo Li. The firmness in the girl's eyes made him fall silent. He had underestimated the bond between Luo Li and Mu Chen. After a long pause, Luo Heavenly God finally sighed with a bitter smile. "I really don't understand what's so special about that kid. How could he make you defend him like this? If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have the courage to carry the burden of the Luo God Clan," Luo Li said softly. "Then I should thank him." Luo Heavenly God smiled. He then stepped forward, gently patting the soft shoulder of the young girl. "I don't oppose your feelings for him, but sometimes, what a man needs isn't protection. And I can see that, although he seems gentle on the outside, he has as much pride as anyone. I'd like to see, one day, if he can truly take my precious granddaughter back from me." "I think Grandpa will lose," Luo Li said, her lips curving into a gentle smile. "Then we'll wait and see," Luo Heavenly God said nonchalantly. He then asked, "Shouldn't you be leaving now?" Luo Li gazed at the figure of the young man who had been watching her from afar, her eyes reddening again. She bit her lip and, after a moment, nodded resolutely. Her jade-like hand lightly tugged at the thunder-swallowing crane's lightning feathers. The crane let out a thunderous roar, its wings shaking as it rapidly flew toward the massive spatial vortex. Mu Chen looked at Luo Li, who was about to leave, and suddenly took a deep breath. He shouted loudly, "Luo Li, wait for me. Once I become an unmatched powerhouse, I'll find you and smash to pieces all those bastards who dare bully you." His voice, enveloped by mighty spiritual energy, rang through the heavens and earth like thunder, leaving all the students of Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy stunned. This kid. Both the North Abyss Dragon Kuan and the Grand Song Academy headmaster were taken aback, then couldn't help but laugh, their eyes full of admiration. Luo Li, who was about to dive into the spatial vortex, let out a soft chuckle. Yet, her eyes were even redder. She covered her mouth with her jade hand, not looking back. She just nodded with force, and then finally rushed into the spatial vortex, disappearing from sight. Luo Heavenly God walked at the back. He first cast a strange glance at Mu Chen. On his somewhat stern, aged face, a barely perceptible smile seemed to appear for a moment. However, he ultimately snorted coldly at Mu Chen, then cupped his fists slightly toward the North Abyss Dragon Kuan and Grand Song Academy headmaster before turning and entering the spatial vortex. Hiss hiss. The spatial vortex slowly began to turn and eventually dissipated, the sky returning to its calm state once again. As they departed, the oppressive aura that had hung over the entire Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy quietly faded away. This caused countless students to secretly breathe a sigh of relief and wipe away their cold sweat. Mu Chen remained still, his gaze fixed on the spot where the spatial vortex had disappeared, unmoving for a long time. Around him, many members of the Luo God Society cast their glances at him but did not disturb him. Yi Qingling and the others sighed softly, signaling the others to disperse and not to disturb Mu Chen at this moment. Mu Chen stood silently for nearly half an hour before finally sitting down slowly on the towering rock. He lay back, his hands spread out, and his eyes gently closed. Ling Shi quietly appeared behind Mu Chen. She looked at him for a moment, but did not speak. The 9 nether soul sparrow in the sky also descended, transforming into a slender, graceful figure. Seeing Mu Chen in this state, she frowned slightly and said, "Are you really starting to give up already? If that's the case, I must say I'm utterly disappointed in you. If your understanding of him is this shallow, then your bloodline bond is utterly useless." Ling Shi glanced at the 9 nether soul sparrow and spoke lightly. "Oh." The 9 nether raised an eyebrow, turning to look at the beautiful woman dressed in white, who exuded an air of coolness. She smiled slightly, but there was a hint of coldness and danger in her expression. "It seems you have a strong opinion about our bloodline bond. If I had the ability, I would definitely sever it. I don't want Mu Chen to be dragged down by it for any reason," Ling Shi replied. "Sever the bloodline bond? You really overestimate yourself," the 9 nether soul sparrow sneered, her red lips curling up. "Do you want me to give it a try?" Ling Shi's voice turned cold. "Then come and try." The two women locked eyes, neither of them yielding an inch. Their first face-to-face meeting was unexpectedly filled with a tense atmosphere, as if they were on the verge of a confrontation. Enough! Just as it seemed like their verbal sparring might escalate into physical conflict, a shout suddenly rang out. Mu Chen's eyes snapped open, and he looked at them with a commanding gaze. However, his authority seemed to have no effect on the two women before him. "You little brat, feeling mighty, huh?" The 9 nether soul sparrow took a step forward, her perfect, long jade legs moving gracefully toward Mu Chen. Her face wore a dangerous smile as she slowly clenched her hand, making a sharp cracking sound. Ling Shi also turned her gaze toward Mu Chen, her slender fingers flickering with the glow of distant stars. "Cough. You two continue." Mu Chen quickly got up, giving a dry laugh. A wise man doesn't pick a fight when outmatched. With the strength of the two women before him, either one could easily crush him. Seeing Mu Chen's reaction, both the 9 nether soul sparrow and Ling Shi couldn't help but raise their lips, but as their gazes met, they snorted in unison and turned away, showing no further interest. "All good now?" the 9 nether soul sparrow asked. "I'm not that fragile." Mu Chen smiled, lifting his head again and gazing at the place where the spatial vortex had disappeared. A smile appeared on his handsome face. "I'm really looking forward to the day I go to the Luo God Clan. And for that day, I will give it my all. No one can stop me." The 9 nether soul sparrow and Ling Shi looked at the confident smile on Mu Chen's face and let out a light breath, feeling somewhat reassured. Mu Chen stretched lazily. It seemed that his time at Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy was coming to an end. However, before that, he would need to make a real breakthrough. Only by advancing to the supreme stage would he be qualified to graduate from Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, Back Mountain. This area was shrouded in dense spiritual mist, with vast and boundless spiritual energy roaring between heaven and earth. Faintly, the sound of crashing waves could be heard. Mu Chen stood atop a lush peak. On the peak was a lotus-shaped stone platform, which connected to the only 8th-level spirit gathering array within Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Generally speaking, places like this are not open to students of the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. However, Mu Chen had, in a sense, already surpassed the triple divine soul tribulation, with one foot stepping into the supreme stage. Such strength was far beyond that of ordinary students. Moreover, he had won the championship in the Spiritual Academy Grand Competition for Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Now, his status within the academy had reached an almost unattainable height. As long as his requests were not too unreasonable, the academy would fulfill them without hesitation. Therefore, granting him exclusive access to the only cultivation platform connected to the 8th level spirit gathering array was only natural. Mu Chen took a deep breath, allowing the vast spiritual energy of heaven and earth to flow into his body, bringing a refreshing sensation. He sat down cross-legged, and a streak of dark light shot out from within him, transforming into a graceful figure beside him. "You've basically established your supremacy now," Xun'er remarked after a glance at Mu Chen. "But your supremacy is empty, lacking spiritual energy. Right now, it's nothing more than a shell." Mu Chen nodded. During his battle with Ji Xian, he had only been able to unleash such overwhelming power because he had borrowed the strength of the great Xun'er demon pillar to fill his supremacy. If he were to pour all of his own spiritual energy into it, it would still be just a drop in the ocean. Now that the power of the great Xun'er demon pillar had dissipated, his supreme sea lay empty. His next step was to condense spiritual energy and completely fill it. Only then could he truly claim to have stepped into the supreme stage. Xun'er sat beside Mu Chen, curling her long, slender legs slightly. Her sharp chin rested against her knees as she gazed at him and asked, "What are your plans after breaking into the supreme stage? I doubt Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy can offer you much anymore. If you stay here too long, pardon my bluntness, you'll never qualify to enter the Luo God Clan." Mu Chen nodded slightly. He knew that if he truly wanted to become stronger, he couldn't remain in Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy forever. "We share a bloodline bond, so you should already know some of my secrets, such as this." Mu Chen clenched his hand, and a mysterious black page, glowing faintly, appeared in his palm. Seeing the page, Xun'er's body tensed instinctively. After all, she had suffered at its hands before. "Have you ever heard of the eternal undying body?" Mu Chen's eyes burned with anticipation as he gazed at the eternal diagram. In his hand, a smile forming on his lips. Eternal undying body. At those words, Xun'er's head snapped up, her beautiful eyes flickering with shock. A moment later, she regained her composure, but still couldn't hide her lingering disbelief. "You mean the eternal undying body that ranks fourth among the 99 supreme Dharmakayas?" Mu Chen nodded slightly. This was a monumental secret, but he trusted Xun'er completely. After all, their lives were bound together. "If I obtain it and successfully cultivate it, do you think I could become an unrivaled powerhouse?" Mu Chen asked softly. "Impossible," Xun'er blurted out. Mu Chen was taken aback. "I can't. No. I mean, how could you possibly cultivate the eternal undying body?" Xun'er quickly shook her head, staring at him as if he were crazy. "Do you even understand what the eternal undying body represents?" Now it was Mu Chen's turn to be puzzled. He only knew that it ranked fourth among the supreme Dharmakayas, which meant it had to be extraordinarily powerful. But beyond that, he knew little. The eternal undying body ranks fourth among the 99 supreme Dharmakayas, Xun'er explained slowly. But what you probably don't know is that it was once one of the 10 primordial law bodies from the ancient era. 10 primordial law bodies. Mu Chen frowned. What are those? These 10 primordial law bodies were the most powerful supreme Dharmakayas in existence. Their might was beyond imagination. During the great calamity of the ancient era, when the extraterritorial clan invaded, the great thousand worlds suffered constant defeat, with countless lower dimensions falling into enemy hands. It wasn't until 10 super-powerful individuals, each cultivating one of these primordial law bodies, appeared that the tide of war stabilized. However, by the end of the calamity, nearly all 10 of these supreme beings had perished. 5 of the primordial law bodies were completely destroyed, and even their cultivation methods were lost forever. Only 5 remained. The 5 that now occupy the top ranks of the 99 supreme Dharmakayas. But even so, no one has ever successfully cultivated one. Those top 5 supreme Dharmakayas have only ever existed in legends. And the eternal undying body you're talking about. Mu Chen stood there, stunned. He hadn't expected the origins of the eternal undying body to be so grand. If you really managed to cultivate the eternal undying body, then congratulations. You might just be able to join the ranks of the superpowers in the Great Thousand Worlds, said Nine Nether, her gaze fixed on Mu Chen with a touch of curiosity. But how are you so confident that you can acquire the cultivation method for the eternal undying body? Mu Chen smiled slightly and waved the mysterious black paper in his hand. Have you heard of the legendary Immortal Tome? The Primordial Divine Codex, the Immortal Tome? Nine Nether's small, rosy lips parted slightly in shock. Mu Chen was somewhat surprised at how much Nine Nether knew, but when he thought about her background, he understood. The Nine Nether Sparrow clan had deep foundations and numerous ancient texts, so it made sense that Nine Nether would be aware of many ancient secrets. This piece of black paper is one page of the Immortal Diagram, which is part of the Immortal Tome. From what I know, the Immortal Tome has already been divided into 3 pages. If I can acquire the remaining 2 pages, I will be able to obtain the true eternal undying body, Mu Chen said softly. Nine Nether stared at the glowing black paper in Mu Chen's hand, still stunned. After a long while, she took a deep breath, suppressing the shock in her heart. She looked at Mu Chen with a complex expression, never expecting that he possessed such a treasure. You've really got some incredible luck. Nine Nether sighed, her voice tinged with envy. If one day you manage to gather all 3 pages of the Immortal Diagram and successfully cultivate the eternal undying body, not even that old man or the Heavenly Supreme could do anything to you. Mu Chen chuckled, but then his expression turned a little troubled. But the world is vast. It's nearly impossible to find the other 2 pages of the Immortal Diagram. Nine Nether pondered for a moment, then hesitated before speaking. I have a suggestion. Mu Chen's eyes lit up. Doesn't your 5 great academies possess a special artifact? That artifact can penetrate any barrier and sense all things in the world. Perhaps it could be used to detect some traces of the Immortal Tome. The Mirror of Judgment. Mu Chen's eyes gleamed with increasing excitement, his heart stirring with anticipation. Although he wasn't sure what the outcome would be, it was definitely worth trying. As for how to use the Mirror of Judgment, he might need to seek help from the Grand Song Academy headmaster. However, I still advise you to calm your thoughts for now. Even if you obtain the Immortal Tome right now, it would be a disaster, Nine Nether said indifferently. Mu Chen smiled, not denying it. He knew that if he got the Immortal Tome, right now, he likely wouldn't be able to protect it. But he wasn't expecting to obtain it in the short term. After all, even with just this page of the Immortal Diagram, the Great Sun indestructible body recorded on it, he could only watch helplessly because he lacked the materials to complete it. For now, it was best to focus on advancing into the Supreme Stage. Taking a deep breath, Mu Chen suppressed the surge of emotions in his heart and gradually regained his composure. Then, with a flick of his hand, he stored the Immortal Diagram into his body. Protect me while I cultivate, Mu Chen whispered, then placed his hands in a formation and slowly closed his eyes. As his eyes closed, the dense spiritual mist in the surrounding world began to ripple and surge toward him at an incredible speed, continuously flooding into his body. Mu Chen's mind sank inward, and the spiritual energy surged like a torrent. The speed at which it poured in was far beyond what he'd experienced before. Within less than half an hour, his Qi was already filled with vast and boundless spiritual energy. The sheer power of the energy was so overwhelming that even his Qi felt a slight sting, as if it was on the verge of breaking. Despite the pain, Mu Chen showed no sign of stopping. With a thought, he intensified the absorption, and the spiritual energy surged even more violently. The spiritual energy flooded in, and Mu Chen's Qi quickly reached its limit. At that moment, Mu Chen's face grew solemn. He knew that the next step was the most crucial. Only by shattering his Qi and replacing it with the Supreme Qi could he take the next step in his cultivation. But if he failed, the consequences would be dire. Mu Chen's eyes suddenly snapped open, his gaze sharp and fierce. He took a deep breath, and in an instant, a torrent of spiritual energy surged into his body, eventually pouring into his Qi, which was already at its limit. The spiritual energy there, unable to withstand the pressure, finally exploded.